I was asked a question about whether or not people should have access under our Constitution and laws to automatic weapons, and I referred the reporter to the factual situation, that in fact under our Constitution and laws such access is allowed. I will state boldly, though, that I am a supporter of the Second Amendment, and I believe strongly that law-abiding citizens should have their right to keep and bear arms left intact. The gun control mentality is ruthlessly absurd. It suggests that you pass a law which will bind law-abiding citizens. They won't have access to weapons. Now, we know that criminals, by definition, are people who don't obey laws. Therefore, you can pass all the laws you want. They will still have access to these weapons, just as they have access to illegal drugs and other things right now. That means you end up with a situation in which the law-abiding folks can't defend themselves, and the crooks have all the guns. I don't believe in arming the criminals and protecting the criminals while leaving the law-abiding citizens disarmed and telling our police that they must work under every disadvantage. That doesn't serve order, it doesn't serve law, and it doesn't make sense.
You remember the law school shooting last week in Grundy, Virginia? Well, John Lott, Jr. of the American Enterprise Institute wrote a fascinating column in the New York Post today in which he pointed out that in only 4 of about 280 stories that he found on LexisNexis about that shooting did they mention the fact that, remember, there was a shooting and a professor was killed, the dean was killed, and then a bunch of students is reported to have subdued the shooter. You know what they failed to tell you? They failed to tell you that 2 of the students who initially were able to subdue that gunman were themselves armed. They ran, got their weapons out of their vehicles, came back, pointed them in the direction of the gunman, were able to disarm him, and then other students joined them in subduing him. Now think about that. Why is it that they use things like this as the poster stories of gun control, and yet when you examine the fact of an episode like this, it turns out that guns were used by law-abiding citizens to avoid greater death and mayhem. And in fact, there are a lot of reason to believe that when responsible citizens are encouraged in the appropriate, responsible, and educated use of firearms in self-defense, they are able to avert disaster. Not a bullet was fired by them in doing this, and that happens hundreds of times every year. But you don't read it in the press. That's more than bias. That's the kind of thing that could distort our judgment and lead us into a very bad mistake about our own defense. That's my sense of it. Thanks for being with me.